begin recording. Welcome to Good Grief, a question and answer panel with four people who I've invited to be part of this call on this panel as people who I know personally have experience with holding space for emotional healing and especially grief, and also people who have personal experience as someone who has had grief and has done, you know, the brave experiment of letting grief happen in our personal space. And my name, for those of you who don't know, is Nicole Hartley Bradford, and I'm the originator of something called Awakening the Village. And I am an transformational experiment creator and catalyst in service to Team Gaia. And the purpose of this space that I wanted to exist, that I've initiated here today, is a space where we can have a discovery discussion and maybe even do a little bit of experimenting. I don't know if that will happen or not, about grief. And I've invited space holders and grievers who can bring gold from their own personal experiences and experiments to share with each other, so that there can come into existence more spaces where grief can happen, where grieving can happen, and the healing power of grief can, do its magic and transform us, and on a wider collective scale, those ripple effects can happen, and this for me is a source of transformation for the world. And so I welcome you all as kind of the originator of this event, as one of a series, and there'll be more about that later. And I would like now to pass over the space holding to you, Naomi. Thank you so much for being here to be the host for this panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, welcome to us all here in this space created, impulsated by Nicole. Good Grief. And I am imagining that we all have a personal journey on what made it happen that we are here on this call now, either invited as a panelist to share discoveries about grief, or here to, we are welcoming another person. Or here to share and listen about grief from whoever will be sharing in the space. And I'd love to hear, does it work for you, Nicole, if we all share shortly, or would you rather do breakout rooms?
I feel a bit scared about only having like less than 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And so maybe breakout rooms would be a good way to go, even though not everyone would hear from everyone else. Or we could use the chat to,
Yeah, I'd like, since Nicole has invited a few people that you have a special relationship to about grief, they are Meaghan, Christine, Philip, and who am I forgetting?
I'm the fourth one.
And you're the fourth one. Okay. I'd love to hear a few words from you, just where you are and what was your purpose? What brought you here to this space? What is the special relationship that you have to grief that brought you here as a context for where we are? Would anybody like to go first?
I can go. My own personal experience of grief, I would say, started, of course, as a child, where as a child I naturally grieved until I learned that it wasn't welcome. And I did have spaces as a child where my tears and my other feelings were welcome. But of course, as many of you would have experienced also in modern culture, this kind of space got smaller and smaller as I grew up. And this meant that when my father died, my father Rowan died when I was 23 or 4 years old, and this was devastating for me. And it took about 3 years until I really grieved losing him. I walked around for 3 years with all of this sadness and anger and yeah, really fear about how was I going to be okay without my dad. And one day I had an experience that I couldn't hold it anymore. It all came pouring out, and I learned so much from that experience. And then yet, even after having that experience, it took me years and years to really be clear in my mind and in my more like experiential self that grief was something that had gifts in it, rather than something that I should swallow and pretend I wasn't having. And as I held space for my own children and then sometimes for friends, I started to develop skills as someone who could hold space for grief. And my own grieving process informed my space holding, which then also informed my ability and capacity to grieve. And it's come to my attention so starkly in over these last couple of years, especially with people who are handling what COVID has brought, that there's so much grief, and I want more spaces to exist. So here we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Meaghan, Christine, or Philip, what made you say yes to the occasion of speaking here, sharing about grief?
I can go next. So very similar to Nicole, I had a lot of experiences in my childhood where it wasn't okay to tap into the depth of what I was feeling. And I have a background in psychology, and a lot of the focus on grief that I had looked into was really mental based. And I had an experience where my grandparents passed away when I was younger and didn't really feel in contact with that. And then my cat passed away, and I had this absolute overswell of grief that just completely overtook my life. And it didn't make sense in my rational mind because I loved my cat, but it wasn't this depth of experience that I was having. And I started really to realize that this was a portal into the grief that I hadn't felt in the past. And I got a window into the multidimensional nature of the grieving experience, in that there are so many things that we grieve in life, whether it be changes in identity, whether it be losing a family member or a pet, or grieving a job loss. There are so many different things that we get to move through and interface with. And so I really love working with the body and really understanding how we can experience and move the grief that is stored in our body, so that we can allow these experiences to move through us and to kind of, like Nicole said, to get the gold out of the experience.
Would you say just one of the ways that you have found to move this grief through your body?
Definitely. So I do a lot of energy work and then also somatic work. So understanding kind of where the nervous system is. So kind of combining energy practices and moving our awareness into our body in a way where we can create safety for some of these really big feelings that we haven't been able to fully come into contact with before.
Okay, thank you. I also saw that there was a request in the chat of knowing where everyone geographically is based. Meaghan, would you add that to your participation?
Definitely. Thank you for the reminder. So I'm from Calgary, Alberta.
Me too.
All right. Two representatives of Canada. Why don't we all just say into this space where we are right now? I'm in Mexico.
I'm in Germany.
And could you say your name at the same time so that we know where to look?
My name is Benedict, and I'm in Germany right now.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Valerie, and I'm in Vernon, BC, Canada.
I'm Philip, and I'm on Vancouver Island in Canada.
I'm Joanne, and I'm from Calgary.
I'm Christine, and I'm calling in from the Harz Mountains in Germany.
My name is Nature. I'm calling in from Salt Spring Island, Canada.
My name is Katrin, and I'm calling from Regensburg, southern Germany.
Bonnie,
Is sharing. You are
Yeah.
not able to verbally participate and you're in Alberta, Canada. Thank you. Okay, anything from Kurt? Can you hear us? You're frozen on my screen.
Oh, yes, Kurt here from Edmonton.
And where's that at?
Oh, in Alberta, Canada.
In Alberta, Canada. Okay. So I'm
Or
hearing
north,
we have
north of Calgary.
north of Calgary. Okay. I have never been to Canada, and I see that we have a strong representation of the of Canada. We have a Canada squad, and we have a few people in Europe, and we have a lost European in Mexico over here where I am. All right. It's always special to realize how many kilometers are behind us while we're creating intimacy and connection and deepening of something as human as grief in this case. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation, Philip, of sharing that. All right. I would still love to hear from Christine and Philip. What made you say yes to be an official grief panelist on this call today?
My best friend at the end of high school and a few years later than that, a guy by the name of Matthew, died suddenly. He went into hospital, something wrong with his nose, and 2 days later he was dead, and no one could understand why or knew what was happening. And so as a young man, that was already a first contact for me with intimate connection to someone who I'd lost. And then a few years ago, I was in a brand new relationship. I'd met the woman of my dreams, and a few weeks later, we discovered that she had terminal cancer. And so we fought her cancer as much as we could. But while we were getting to know one another and going through the process of morphing from dating into relationship, she was dying. And 6 months later, she was gone, or 8 months later, she was gone. And so the big piece that that I can contribute over here is one, having those firsthand experiences, but also having done a lot of healing work on my own, this relationship with attachment versus letting go. And within the relationship with my partner, Gudrun, who I lost to cancer, that was an experience of living grief, of how to be 100% present and constantly letting go, and to be able to let go afterwards. And the other piece that I just want to share in terms of my space holding around grief is related to creating environments that are safe for us to deeply emote. And I heard a little bit from both Nicole and Meaghan about this, the magnitude of the emotions. So that ability to create spaces where we can be vulnerable, like not necessarily physical spaces, but emotional spaces, where I'm not afraid that something terrible will happen if I feel. And we can talk more about that as we go on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your experiences and already raising a few questions of how I heard how to let go, with how to let go and be in grief, how to create spaces where we can be vulnerable. But I'm not afraid of what will happen if I feel. Thank you.
Yes, I'm here to talk about more the grief, about letting go of an identity or memetics or construct that we had. Most of you here are, I think, in possibility management and heard of about the survival strategy of contamination, where you contaminate your adult ego state with childhood behaviors or gremlin behaviors, or with a lot of voices from parent ego state. And what I did the last year was doing a decontamination process, which is, for me, from my experience, also very connected to behavioral therapy, where you look at the behaviors you have from the child, and then you get it back into the child and deal with the emotions that come up and do a lot of completion loops. And through that, the strongest behavior I had was analyzing everything I do. And while I put that out, it was like as if you put the plate away from something, and then like a box opened from my child ego state where I had a lot of grief, and it was like this thing that I experienced, that when in modern culture you have to be very quick, you like kind of forced to grow up, which is not really growing up. And I felt it in my body that I was grieving not having enough time, that I have to be quick, that I like a lot of things. And yeah, Nicole invited me to talk about that, and also about how to hold space when there's actually grief, and not go immediately to anger. Like I experienced a lot of space holding where I couldn't go to the bottom of it, and then I always snapped back in other ego states, and I couldn't hold my adult enough to say what I needed. So it was like the inner ping pong game between the ego states showed in the outside. And yeah, I want to give some clarity out about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I feel joy because listening to you speak so far is painting a picture about what we could be learning about in the next hour and 10 minutes, and this huge potential or discovery field of grief. I'm getting some ingredients from you as we speak, and we've only just begun. And I'd love to propose that we shortly break off into breakout rooms, because we are more people, and everybody brings valuable questions. And just to mobilize what it is that we're curious about, I'd love to propose that we have a 5-minute breakout room with about 3 participants in each room, for us to share, like, what curiosity do we come with here? And so we can already start harvesting some questions, which we could then go into when we get back. Nicole, do you have you're able to make breakout rooms, correct?
Yeah.
So in possibility management, there's the experience that sadness is a resource that is really connected to tuning into myself and empathy, listening, letting go. And in that sense, I'd invite all of us to tune into our sadness, use our sadness to tune into ourselves and what it is that we are maybe curious about or really wanting to learn something about, and then share from there in the breakout rooms.
How long will we do this, Naomi?
I would propose 5 minutes. 5 minutes, and in those 5 minutes, everybody just,
Just a quick share.
co-create a quick share together.
So how it will go is as soon as I open the breakout rooms, you'll click to join your breakout room. And then after 4 minutes, I will close the breakout rooms and you'll have another minute.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just pause the recording while we're
Right. We seem to all be back from
A person's missing? Is
the
that right?
space of missing. Meaghan, Joan, Val, Christina, Nicole, Bonnie.
Yes, the
Nature's. I know
The
you're
man.
also here.
no, I don't know. There were 13 earlier. Now we're 12.
Thank you for your sharp noticing. Okay, I propose we go ahead and see if this other person still comes in. They might contact you in the chat or something, Nicole.
yeah, thank you. I'll keep an eye.
Yeah. Thank you. I was only in my space and not in your spaces. And it was a short and touching space for me. I'd love to hear from each space. Maybe one person could capture the essence of something that came out of that space. A question, or yeah, what was the essence of some of the questions in your space?
Something
I would like to share something about in terms of holding space for grief, that I noticed for myself and also for others when the grief is there, how much we are used to go in the I have to do something or go out of it, and think that we have no clarity about something. Just the speaking from the feeling, and someone just being there and listen to it is very important for the holding space. And I think, or that what I experienced was that just was what was missing in the whole process was just the other person, and that's not so much about doing anything. Just I have these images sometimes about just sitting next to someone, shoulder against shoulder, is already a way of holding space. And what came to me is that maybe it's a concept about this female thing, but this, like, going to the bottom of the sadness makes you receiving the next thing. And then it's about not thinking in a box what this is, just having the next impulse to, I don't know, to get a plate is already the next receiving thing to do, and it doesn't have to be much. So it's yeah, I just want to put some value on this time thing, to take time, and yeah, thank you.
Taking time and being with as
Yeah,
as a way of creating space for sadness to be, as if the sadness needs to be someone to be with it, with you.
Yeah, there's, for example, when women have their menstruation, it's just about the being with, and there's a process called red tent, where you just go there as a woman and you bleed there, and the other women occasionally come to you and just spend time with you. There doesn't have to be talking or anything. And I think the same process goes for grieving. May it be a blue or green tent, whatever, and you can just set this up and be there, and just know that some of the times people will show up and you can just talk about what's going on, and you don't have to do anything in that tent. People come to you, give you food or whatever you need in that process. Yeah. Thank you for saying that, Naomi.
Yeah. So I'd like to flag being with as something that maybe will come back in this conversation. Just to be transparent about my intention, I was thinking to hear a few questions that are happening in the space so that we know how we are here in the space with the questions we have. And then to take time for a few questions, like hearing the different panelists and all just also going ahead and asking questions. That's, yeah, the idea that I've had to hold the space. Yeah.
In our breakout room, Philip brought up a question about how to prepare ourselves for a grief that we know is in our future, that it's kind of imminent. And I'm so grateful because I've been living with this question, but not as a conscious question. And I feel glad to have this kind of this spark lit about what will I need in the future when grief comes that I don't yet have in place.
One or another question that was happening in another space.
Definitely. So in my group, there was some questions that came up around kind of like, how do you process the emotion that's coming up? How do you work with that? And then it tied into kind of a question around like, what was the overall process of grief? Like, what does that look like for people? And again, Nicole, that same question actually came up in my group around kind of there is a grief in our future that we are preparing for, and how do we land in that and be with that experience?
In our group, there was the theme of the amount of grief that was there, the metaphor with the big C, and is it ever going to end is also as a question there. Mm-hmm. And what also comes for me personally is the situation that I tended to, when I feel sad or when I feel grief, to get small and to really get into some kind of shy position. And for some time now, I'm more in a really grown and I'm here position while grieving and letting it go. And there's the question, what mechanism, I have some ideas, but I'm curious about new impulses. What mechanism brings me into going small and going just to myself and not being there with others, but yeah, hiding.
Thank you, Benedict.
I had a question.
Yeah, go.
Of just like how to like consciously invoke grief, like when you want to bring it, you're like creating a space to feel it, how to bring it forward consciously.
For yourself or for the other person that you're holding space for?
First it was for myself, but I think it's also useful to know how to do it for others as well. Yeah.
I posed the question whether grief was I heard that story once, that grief is always, when you're grieving, you're doing it for yourself. Yeah, I'm interested in your experiences about that. And then there's the question about grieving when somebody is dying, letting go, being in the process, even though the person, not even though, well, with the person being there.
Then how to be there when someone is dying? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Or similar process, needn't be dying, about saying goodbye and grieving. Yeah. And the other person is there still. It's not gone. She's not gone. They.
Thank you.
All right. I imagine that there is and were more questions, and I'm also realizing that questions can be answered as they are said in the space. So I'd love to start asking questions and then have any panelists share their gold with us about what it is that this question prompts in you. And yeah, a question that I heard several times also in our space is how do I go about the grief? How do I do it? How do I do it when the amount seems to be so huge? And also maybe this brings something of the essence of what is grief. And so I'd like to ask any who feels prompted to speak about what is the essence of grief, and what is the gold you've found to grieve in a way that felt like it got to the essence of what it needs.
Yeah, I feel glad for how you put the question, Nature. My experience most of my life was that I finally did, like, the dam kind of broke because there was so much weight, and this wasn't a conscious choice that I made. It was an unconscious choice to start letting myself feel the grief and have it kind of take me over. And this question about how to do that on purpose, I've really just started having experiences where I could notice that I had grief, put it aside, and ask for someone to hold space for me, and then go into a space and then feel the grief. And a lot of it has to do with the space holder and an agreement that we are on, in possibility management, what we call the new map of four feelings, where instead of feelings being not okay and wrong, and they mean you're crazy, and they mean you're stupid, and they mean you're childish and out of control, that on the new map, each feeling, anger, sadness, fear, and joy, has information and fuel for me to handle my life responsibly. And also to have the map that there are emotions and feelings that are distinct from each other, and that emotions are about the past. And loss can happen in the past, and then this anticipating loss can happen, where I can actually grieve in the present a loss that's coming as if it was in the past. And this touches on your question, Katrin, too, is like, is the grief just for me? What I've noticed is that the longer I hold my grief, and which results in me kind of walking around with a reduced capacity to feel and be responsibly handling my life with my feelings in the present, the less available I am in my relationships. And so for me, grieving was absolutely essential for the other people in my world. My grieving was essential for them, because then they had me as an adult, as a capable person. And that to also speak to how, because people in modern culture, I particularly noticed how well trained I'd been to not feel my feelings, especially with someone looking. That this kind of permission plus just practicing doing it was absolutely essential. I couldn't just turn it on right away. There was this process of learning how, and I think, this kind of came as a surprise to me. And as I share that gold with other people, it's often a surprise to them to discover that, as a human with emotions, that I would have to learn how to feel them, especially in super high intensities, and then also in low intensities, so that I can notice them sooner and not have them build up and pile up until they burst.
I'm hearing you highlight the importance of making it happen, not just waiting until it comes, but also the practice of going into grief consciously. Mhm.
And I love that distinction that Nicole made, where she can kind of put the grief, she can almost compartmentalize it a little bit, but it's still within the sphere of her experience. And I think that's kind of how we can consciously tap into it, is knowing that it's always present in our body. We might just have it dormant for the space and time that we need. And really that anytime we're able to really drop in to grief and make that distinction about thinking about our grief versus feeling our grief, because our body is beautifully protective. And when we start to feel grief, when those feelings from our body start to bubble up, we will immediately kind of put the gears of our mind in place, because we're actually lifting ourselves out of that experience because it doesn't feel safe in our body. And so we can start to just notice and direct our experience, our capacity back to our body. Okay, I'm really thinking about this experience, what's happened, where do I feel this in my body? You're going back up into the mind, coming back into the body. And in this way, we're actually using our nervous system to titrate our experience. So we go into the intensity of what's happening in our body, the physical sensation of grief, and then we allow ourselves to come out of that and to process and to think. And then we redirect ourselves down into what it is that we're experiencing in our body. And that increases our capacity to feel and be with the intensity of some of those big feelings. And as we open up to that, some of that floodgate experience does happen, but we know that we can always just say, like, okay, I can focus on my environment again. If it's too intense in my body, I can seek to look around the room, to presence myself where I am, to know that I'm safe. Mm-hmm.
So I'm
Yeah.
hearing one of the how-tos that you bring as a space holder for yourself and others is where you focus your attention on, like on the body, to be with the grief. And there's always the safety option to focus your attention on something else, to be able to consciously go in and out of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. Christina, you were going to speak.
Yeah, yes, and also to the question of Benedict with the mechanism of going small. Yes, also, maybe important to know that it's, since we are talked about the physical, that there are certain normal responses of the body, of the physical body, which is always contracting and releasing. So when I haven't been there when you experienced that, Benedict, but it might be that it was just the process of the waves of the grief. Like in one grief wave, you were like maybe going into small, and then in another you make yourself bigger because maybe you can hold space more for it, and then also the contraction is not so much in the body anymore. And this going small. Yeah.
I'm curious about, well, I'll just give you an example. So my brother-in-law died. He wasn't even 50. He got an incurable cancer, and I wasn't able to see him because my sister and he were going through a divorce at the time. When he died, I wasn't invited to the funeral, but I did go anyway because my nephews and things were there. My sister and I weren't really on good terms at the time. It really profoundly impacted me, the experience of being at that funeral. And even now, what my question is I'm curious about the difference or the between a grief like that where it felt like a transformative experience because I gave a lot of thought to it, and I did a lot of feeling around that experience, sort of wondering why it was impacting me so much. And even if I listen to certain music, it's like I can sort of tap back into that feeling of that experience, or of like my mom's funeral, for example. I guess my question is around like the difference between that kind of grief that feels like transformative somehow, like I learned things from it, and then this insidious type of grief about like what's happening to the planet, or maybe concerns about I have some friends that have just gone through divorces, for example, and you don't really get to palpably sort of know what to do with that grief. I guess that's kind of, does that make sense?
Difference between a transformative form of grief and other forms of grief that are less clear on how they want to be.
Yeah,
later
if somebody has some insight into that, because I'm just curious, like if it's a matter of that I haven't grabbed onto those other kinds of grief and sort of made like a ceremony, or sort of like consciously sort of brought it in and consciously grieved it, maybe the way a person does when you go to a funeral or something. I'm just curious what you guys think about that, or if that's something important to even talk about, or yeah.
Yeah. Who wants to speak to this?
Yeah, what came to me is that when it's about grief, as I experienced, it's really like first there was a lot of sadness, then there was anger, and I went through the whole feeling cycle, fear and joy, after one another. And what you described with the music and stuff, what came to me, there's this difference to nostalgia, for example, where you mix feelings, and then you go, then it's all about something else. Then maybe fear and sadness are mixed together, and then you don't have the information about the feelings, and then you're just in a loop with yourself, like in a bubble with that feelings, but you can't really be present with them. That's what came to me. Maybe the others have other stuff to say to that.
Yeah, I love that information. That's wonderful. And I think the thing that came up for me too is really around the permission that we give ourselves, and the context of grief with some of those big things where, you know, we have a family member pass. There is some social context for us to deeply grieve that experience because it's honored as a grief experience. But some of those things in life where, you know, we are grieving those things that are a little bit less tangible, whether it be the loss of a relationship or those types of things, we don't give ourselves the depth of permission to go to the bottom of that grief experience because of some of those other factors that are involved. We kind of input how we should feel about this experience. Like, should this job loss impact me in such a way? Like we block ourselves from giving ourselves the permission to kind of fully feel that experience.
Yeah, that's what came to me too, is that no grief can transform me if I don't feel it. And if I haven't given myself permission to feel it, because maybe society says, oh, you shouldn't be scared about that, you shouldn't be worried about it, it shouldn't affect you, then I can't get the transformation from it. And also in regard to the mixed feelings too, this is one of the amazing discoveries of conscious feelings work, is that feelings serve us in their purest form. And this was so valuable to me in some grieving that I was doing lately, to have a space holder who could pick up that I was mixing in some anger and fear into my sadness, which is kind of my now definition of grief. It's mostly sadness, but it's mixed with anger, fear, and maybe even some joy when some nostalgia comes in. And that when I got the my space holder helped me navigate into the purity of the sadness. So and again, this is something I've really just learned to do in the last 6 or 7 months, to really aim for, like Meaghan, you said, like the bottom kind of it. And I think Christina, you use this bottom term also. And what I've discovered is that when I navigate deep, deep, deep down into this pure grief, I do hit a bottom. And this answers one of the questions I saw out of the breakout rooms is, will this ever end? And what I've discovered is that, maybe in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't end because there's another layer and time goes by and there's more to grieve. But each layer, there is a bottom to each layer. And often I in the past I've got down into it, but then it's relieved the pressure enough that I then kind of go back up into my head, back up into verbal reality, into outer reality, doing things and kind of running away from it still a little bit. But if I stay and I keep watching and I have this observer part that's noticing when it's actually all been processed, experienced, and then what I notice about this bottom that I hit, that there's often some really beautiful, often low intensity anger, and this becomes a place to kind of push off from, to get myself out again, it reminds me of the hero's journey down into the underworld and then back up out into the community. Thank you. Philip.
Yeah, so there's a word that we're talking about, a phenomenon that we're talking about, but we're not describing it. So that's the word pain. When we're talking about grief, what we're talking about is transformation or transition that's out of our control. So someone's died, going to die, something's going to change, something's happening, and we can't do anything to manage the fact that that's happening. And then what we're talking here using different descriptors about is what we do in order to be close to our pain, but not be overwhelmed with that pain. And that seems to be behind a lot of the concerns, a lot of the questions that are coming backwards and forwards over here. So I'm going to put that out and then throw it back to everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. This is so relevant. And I think this ties in with, Benedict, what you were saying about constricting, is that, generally, I think I have this story that the human organism has this one part that's designed to avoid pain so as to be able to handle things. But what we've kind of missed is that this pain, and especially this emotional pain, it's not a design flaw. It's not a mistake of design, and that it's not something to always try to avoid. And so this constriction and this kind of holding in happens. Yet if I don't choose to go into it, to turn toward my pain, to feel it, and if I don't know how to set up a space so that I'm safe to do that there, then I carry it around until something else happens. And my sense is that the Indigenous people often had ritual about this. And Valerie, you kind of brought in something about ritual or ceremony, where maybe it was like the custom of the tribe to create a space where all of that pain that's been carried around inside was set up on purpose, for choosing. And I think of some of the ways that the songs that I've heard that come from Indigenous cultures, they sound very much like like it's almost theatrical grieving. And sometimes I think maybe that's what it takes to create a space of permission where people have this clarity that this is for this. This is where you can do that.
I think one of the distinctions that came up for me is I love how you kind of pointed out, Nicole, that idea that pain is bad or that it's something that is a design flaw. And I think the energy of that is often when pain comes up in our experience, we want to move through it, push it away, get rid of it. And it's how do we learn to carry this as part of our experience, right? Because if we learn to carry it and to be with it as it arises or as we choose to move into it, then we don't get those moments where we're completely overwhelmed by it. And maybe we still do, and that's okay. But just that distinction of really like carrying it. This is a part of us. It's like an inherent part of our nature. And it does have those gifts. And to move with it in that way and notice when that pain comes up in you, what is your reaction to that? Do you pull away? Do you dive in to try and get through it as quickly as possible? And I think that gives us a really good energetic framework for how we need to create a relationship with our pain.
And this brings in also the consequences of letting my pain, whether it's anger, sadness, fear, or even joy, like the intensity of emotion, build and build and build until I kind of lose my capacity and then unconsciously burst out. The consequence of this, I think, is what informs this old way of thinking about all the feelings and all the emotions as bad and wrong, is that when they're coming out in this kind of spontaneous, uncontrolled way, that often this is when I create some kind of harm. Like I break something, or I like ruin the party or cause a rupture in my relationships. And I think this is also the gold of creating spaces that are on purpose for this stuff to have its time, and then being able to have so much more capacity come into existence for me, so that then I can handle things and I can be choosing how I do things, rather than like, I don't know, I get the image of a volcano, rather than bursting open and getting lava and devastation everywhere, I go into a space where I see to the anger and whatever else is there, and then I can come out and I can be in connection. And this being with part that came up in the earlier in the call, then this can keep happening. And the question of being with someone, either while I'm grieving or maybe even while they're grieving, if they're, if a person is going through a terminal illness, or knowing that it's them who's making their exit and I'm grieving losing them, that still this ability to be with, even when there are intense feelings, there's more room for it when there's choosing happening and skilled space holding happening, and this permission, along with this ability to, turn it up or turn it down or put it on a shelf without it being swallowing and numbing again.
I really love that, because we're not actually supposed to grieve in isolation. I think there are moments where we can hold space for ourselves, but understanding too that our nervous system is a social connectivity device, right? We are inherently in connection with other beings, and having that space holder, that other person with a nervous system that is regulated and has the capacity to hold some of those bigger feelings in a moment where perhaps our body doesn't, creates that new dynamic for you to experience something in a deeper way. And I think personally, that's something I've had to work through a lot, because I tend to be like, oh, I can do everything by myself, I don't need anyone. But recognizing that that's actually a response that's keeping me out of the depth of my experience. And I can allow people to hold space for me because I hold space for others. And again, just like really recognizing that there's nothing wrong with needing someone else, and finding that space that is safe for you to connect with another human and to experience what you need to experience.
I think we lost Philip in the conversation.
Philip, are you there?
Maybe he had to see to something.
When he gets back, I'd love to hear him from his experience.
Yeah. What came to me after I heard Philip, and what is very important for me or for others when they hold space as a space holder, is really to be really centered and present not shifting into the rescuer. Like you're holding space for surrendering in that moment. And that's a very scary thing, because I always think to myself, what I'm holding space for is this person have experienced maybe a death of a loved one. So something is dying in themselves. So you actually hold space for a death process in them when you're grieving. And this is like very important. And I think there was also the question of Catherine, how to hold space when someone is dying. It's like that finding the place in you in a way where you don't have fear of death yourself. And that's, I don't have like the answer to that, but this is where the state I get into, or where I'm researching, and which, because I want to hold space more for that. Yeah, thank you. And I think
Finding the
Naomi
place,
wanted to say something.
finding
Yeah.
the place where you can be with death or
Mhm.
with your fear, and that it doesn't make you move away from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, a
It's very
theme
important to, oh, sorry, I didn't mean
No,
to talk.
please go ahead.
It's very difficult to find someone though that really knows how to be with someone in grief. In my experience, it's I was just talking to Leanne, Nicole knows her, and we were discussing the death of my sister, and how she wanted, while she was dying, people to just continue living, that it wasn't about dying, it was about living right till the end. And because she was only 38 and she was leaving 4 children behind. And so for her, it was very, very important to live till the end. And to be with her was required a great deal of energy, because she still wanted to do things with her children, like a movie night and taco night or whatever. And so that the living part, and that they know that their lives have mattered. Like that's so important to me, that people understand that they contributed to this life, and that that they matter. And but like to I started with is, finding someone that is willing to listen to you. And like I have, till I encountered Nicole, I've never found anyone that was at all adequate in how they were able to like walk with me in grief, or and more often than not, I was made to feel guilty because, oh, these people are in a better place and all that kind of stuff. Well, that to me is not reassuring at all. And so everyone is doing a great job. I'm really happy to hear from everyone. And thank you so much for considering grief important, because I've encountered it too much in my life, and I suppose I'll encounter it even more since I'm 74, and I want to live right till the end, and not grieve. Like I would like to deal with all the things that have caused me to grieve in my life to be dealt with, and so that I can really live to the end. So thank you for your time, and thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Joanne. Welcome back, Philip. I'd like, we've already started harvesting. We've already harvested so much rich things. I'm also writing them down as we go along. And it seems we do keep getting to the question. What I heard is it's important to recognize that it is to grieve. I heard this from you, Meaghan, too, that a funeral is like an official recognition that this is for grieving. And without an official recognition like that, people just keep moving on. I moved a lot from one country to another as a child, and we would arrive in a new culture and we would be going with the new culture and trying to figure out how it is to live there. And there was no recognition of what there was to grieve. And I think this is just one example of how it happens in other people's lives, that it's not made with a ritual or some kind of recognition. It's not recognized that this is a place to grieve. And then that sounds like one element that impedes actually really going into the sadness, hitting the bottom of it until you find something that you push off from, like when you get to a new place because you transition the grief, you really process it. So I'm hearing there's the importance of really allowing yourself the depth of the experience. And at the same time, I'm hearing this fear of going in it and never coming out of it again, or going in it and forgetting to live. So it seems like there's, I don't know if it's a paradox, but it seems that we're playing with these different elements. And Philip brought in the question, how can we be close to our pain and not be overwhelmed by it? So yeah, Philip, you shared these two really important sounding, vast sounding grief experiences of your own life. And would you share any of the golds that you have found so far about how to be with grief? Is there anything that you would share with us?
So just a disclaimer, when I use terminologies of emotions and feelings, I'm using them to describe anything that moves through us as a I'm going to say emotional response to the world. I'm not using opportunity management use of the words. And our emotions are what keep us safe in the world. They're a response to things that we perceive as threatening. And in the worldview that I have, there are layers of things that are threatening that are physical. Someone pointing a gun, something burning, something asphyxiating, and then all the other things. And all the other things I call emotional threats. And when we dig under all of them, what I found is that they all come back to this concern about the pain of being separate and isolated. And a lot of what we're going to find when we look into grief is that there's this concern, there's this fear of feeling that pain, and that if we look deeply enough, it's going to take us to, feel separate. I'm no longer able to connect. And the related piece, I may not belong, or I'm unworthy of connection. I'm unworthy of being loved or lovable. I've lost a connection to a thread of love and connectedness that my being depended on. And there's a piece that goes along with that, and that's that every time I have an emotional feeling, that emotional feeling sits on top of an idea or a thought or a belief. So if I'm looking at a dog and the thought or belief that I have is that dog's dangerous, I'm going to feel fear. If I have a thought or belief that the dog's cute or sweet or loving, I'm going to have other emotions in response. And for anyone who's familiar with Byron Katie's work, there's some great stuff that she does around bringing this to life, this whole world of the distinction or this connection between thoughts, beliefs, and ideas. And what I do with people that I'm working with is get below the emotions, ask them to go into what is it that you're feeling, What is it? What emotions are coming up for you? And then let's try to find the idea that sits underneath that. What's the emotion resting on? And then we check to see if that is an honest reflection of reality, or where did that belief come from, or how does it serve me? And I want to make it go away because I love my emotions. I want to have them. I want to have the richness of them because they're keeping me safe. But I also know that I have the power to move out of pain, in most cases, simply by shifting what I think and believe, because it wasn't necessarily accurate. I don't want to shift it if it's accurate, but if it's inaccurate, that's the key to moving outside of the pain of grief. And I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I want you to stop now. So I'm hearing now from you, we've looked into different elements that of how to be with grief and how we stop grief. And now I'm hearing from you, looking at the actual thoughts and assumptions and thoughts, beliefs, ideas that are under the grief or under any kind of emotion. And some of them might be inaccurate. And then if we work with those, then that will have a reflection on our emotional state. And would that be is that a key for this question that was in the space of how to be with my grief without being overwhelmed by it? Is this a difference between grief that is a transformational process and grief that maybe morphs more into depression or under other emotional states that we're afraid to sink into?
When people come to, because I work in a kind of counseling context much of the time, when people come to me with deep depression or overwhelming grief or overwhelming emotions, we do this process. We're able to essentially arrest the process that's gotten away by finding where it's coming from. And in order to do that, there's this element that I spoke about earlier about how do we create the safety to feel the emotions, to consciously, to bring into consciousness what the implications are. Like, what is it that I'm not wanting to deal with? Because if I go there, even the idea of it scares the hell out of me because I know there's too much pain for me. So we can work our way backwards by discovering where those pain points are and what my specific concerns are, and checking to see, to see if the thing that I'm most afraid of is really going to happen to me. And in most cases, it isn't. So once I can discover that I'm not going to be completely isolated, I'm not rejected, I can deal with the pain, I am going to come back and discover that I am love worthy. People will connect with me. A lot of that just drops out of the system, and we can relax into something that isn't that intense and seemingly out of control.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that in.
Thanks.
We are getting into our last quarter of an hour of the time that was set for this meeting. And my sense is that there's still so much to talk about, and that this was just the beginning, but not just, it was a beginning, and there was already a lot of value here being brought into the space. And I wonder if each of you panelists, maybe there's something that is burning in you as that you're so interested in sharing this, and that you like, I would like to each of you still share something into the space that if you have something, and then we might still have time for some last reflections or questions before we close the space.
I would love to just circle back to the question that came up around is grief only mine? Like, is it only about me? And I think what Philip spoke about with the thoughts and beliefs, really starting to understand the multidimensional nature of grief, in that sometimes we are grieving collective experiences, collective thoughts and beliefs, collective patterning, intergenerational things. So I think it is a paradox in that it is always ours because it's how we are in relationship to that thing, but not always ours in the sense of something that we've experienced directly. Because I think a lot of those thoughts and beliefs that we uncover, they aren't true to us. They aren't true to our experience because they were something that has been passed along to us. So.
Thank you. Any other gold or passionate experiences around emotion, around grief that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I would like to break a point for, like, when we are space holding for people and ours, especially children, but also what I see right now in the coaching bubble of the internet is that people shift very quick to new identities. And I'm not sure sometimes if they really grieve their growth. And I also want to mention also, as I said, when you hold space for children, that when they start flying and experience this expansion and something new is happening, that they don't forget this grieving moment, because what also can happen is that they go along and then they like fall back on their butt again, like when you fall down as a child on your butt and then you have to get back up again, because they skip this grieving of, oh, I just grow and the old me is gone. And yeah, I want to point that out, that it's also not only about the death, but also for the next step to aliveness in a way.
So you're pointing out in growth, even if there might be the joy of growth, there is also the leaving behind of things, and that it's important to grieve those.
Yeah.
And okay, and you said something about new identities, that people shift into new identities. Is it like wanting to be somewhere?
Yeah, like when people have a goal and they want to, embody that, it can get inauthentic when they forget about that part. That's what I observed.
Thank you. And so grief as a way of integrating the growth more.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything from you, Philip or Nicole?
So I'm looking at Zoom with everybody next to one another, and what it's informing me about is this exit point from overwhelming grief begins with reaching out to someone else. And what we've identified through some of the comments is that some of the people in this group are really able to sit with very intense emotions and to hold that space without going into their own overwhelm. And that's available to everyone. Look for someone who's capable of holding your emotions safely and lovingly when you're ready to move from a place of overwhelming grief to manageable grief and then beyond.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
That's perfect for what I had come to me as a last thing to say is that yeah, in a way I can vouch for what's possible. That there were times when I thought that the grief that I had inside me would have some kind of long-lasting damaging effect if I dared to feel it. And what I found out was that it was actually in a way the opposite, that feeling my grief and allowing myself to become overwhelmed by it, I actually discovered that I am bigger than it is, even though it's massive. And I think maybe this is something to do with the transformational power of feeling really big, intense emotions, including grief and other ones that maybe make the kind of transformation possible on Earth that will lead to a collective transformation about how we live on this beautiful planet together.
I feel curious if Meaghan, Christina, Philip, and Nicole, if you are reachable for offerings around space holding, or if you hold spaces around grief, are you offering anything around this?
Yes, I have asked all of the panelists to bring their upcoming offerings and or contact information so that people here and anyone watching the video or listening to the audio can reach out. And so putting things in the chat is one option, and also speaking. I'll share about what I have on offer, which is a 4-week series called Good Grief that will begin either next Thursday at the same time that this call was, or the Thursday after. It will begin when there are at least 6 people, and we'll do 4 weeks of actually practicing grieving and holding space for grief. And part of this is from my discovery that I had to learn how to hold space for my own grief, and then that helped me learn how to hold space for other people's grief, and that helped me learn how to grieve. So it's this continuum of discovery, and this space will include experienced space holders that are on standby, so that participants can reach out and hold space for each other and be held by other experienced space holders. And I'll put my information in the chat and send it out in an email to everyone here.
Thank you. In the chat are email addresses and Instagram accounts and websites of the people who were here as panelists today. And we still have 4 minutes before the official closing of the space. I imagine that some of us might be able to stay for a few minutes. So for those who want to stay and maybe informally ask something or share, I encourage you to do so. I invite you to do so. And in these last 4 minutes, I'd love what is something that you took today? What is something you took from the space? Maybe it's a question. Maybe it's something that somebody said that you take with you as value. What do you take home with you after this first? It's not the first actually, but after this exploration of grief, this constellation.
I'd like to thank everybody for considering my question, and what was uncovered for me when you guys were talking about it was that, and I had forgotten about this, is that when I was going through the grief of my brother-in-law passing, and not really being able to be part of that family, what I did is I happened to be in a writer's group at the time, and I was writing a play about with those people as characters, which of course I never published, but I think that really helped me. And then I just kind of recognized as we were going through this that process of using an art form to sort of work through like different characters, and you know, some people were bad and some were good and whatever. I was just able to kind of process not only that, but my mother's passing. So I guess my question and my thought is, you know, is this for another time, or for you guys to think about, is like, what role does art have in that process potentially for people? And thank you for your time, everybody.
What stays for me is something that Meaghan shared about when I get into the sadness or into the grief status, and my head is the first one answering and wanting to handle this with thoughts, but that the answer more lies into feeling it into the body, and yeah, and this is what stays a lot with me, to go with that.
Thank you. As
What
a
I
quick
take out is
sorry, yeah, go.
what I take out is this ritual, celebrational aspect of grieving everything, like celebrating everything that you're passing, when you're passing on, when you're growing or shrinking in some way. It's always well, this ritualistic and celebrational thing helps me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, I also took that, and this official recognition, and that we then can unite together in grieving. It's so beautiful. It's like, makes me want to organize, to experience that even as a kind of regular thing, you know, like people do Christmas and they all smile and unwrap presents and things, and I'd love to get together and to grieve and be with what's actually going on as well underneath. As a quick note, there's more space holders in this chat, so if you want to share your contact details because you are available for something, please also go ahead.
Maybe Nicole, you can send them around the contacts.
Yeah, I will. I'll take everything out of the chat and share what's been shared here into an email, and I'm pretty sure I have ways of contacting all of you.
Yes.
And I also invite you to join this Telegram group that I've just posted a link to. And this is where I'll be sharing more about good grief offerings, including offerings not just that have been originated by me. And this is also where you can join that to hear more about the series that I'll be offering.
And we have come to the official time end for this space, whatever the time may be in your time zone. I thank you all for being here. Thank you, Nicole, for this opportunity of holding the space together with you. I feel glad.
And I'd like to take it back. Thank you. And
Yeah.
thank you so much, Naomi, for hosting and for being the kind of dialogue weaver, loom holder for all of this to be drawn out so that we could be with each other and hear from each other and discover more gold and more possibilities about grieving for ourselves and for others.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, everyone. And I will be staying on a little bit longer, so I'm available for the next probably at least 10 minutes. And I look forward to seeing you in other spaces, hopefully in the future. And I wish you good grief.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, everyone. It was touching to be with you.
And everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Bye, Bonnie.
So for me, there's one more question I'm having. It was also on the flyer, and it's the connection about depression and grief.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of possibility management insights to that about unmixing feelings, and yeah, and I'm curious what other possibilities are there, or if you have something to say about that.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. Go.
So I'm the situation you, or kind of things that you're imagining may be different from what I'll describe, but almost inevitably when there's something related to depression, I take it back to futility. The futility is an experience that all of us experienced when we were tiny children, and our parents weren't available to connect with us because they were doing things like cooking dinner or taking care of siblings, or they had their own emotional stuff going on. And so as infants, we have embodied trauma around not being able to get our needs addressed when we reach out. And that feeling, like a baby will cry and cry and cry, and the point at which they stop crying because it's a waste of time anymore is futility. So futility and depression for me go together. It's the point at which the nervous system says, I've tried everything to get whatever it is to feel a particular way, and zero of the things that I've had available have been successful, and now's the time where I stop. And that's why depression looks like us stopping. There's no more motivation to keep trying, to be enlivened, to reach out, to, we don't know where connectedness and love is going to come from. And all it takes to break depression, and this isn't easy when I say all, it can be huge, is finding one more vector, one more thing that we haven't tried yet that can lead us toward that experience of connection and love and having our needs taken care of. And so within a grief context, this may or may not apply, but it very well could.
And I love that too, because I feel like depression is adaptive. It has a purpose. And when we find ourselves in it, I love, Philip, how you said it's kind of that stop energy and stall energy. And my own personal experience with depression was when I got to that place, it's because there was so much that was unresolved in my body that I had not tapped into, that I had not had the capacity or space to feel before. And I feel like depression is that invitation into a little bit more of that internal reflection, and to really start to create more space for those things that perhaps we were ignoring before or putting in the background. And that energy of stop can be that invitation.
Thank you.
Something I'll add is that the distinction that possibility management works with around depression, about how it's made of mixed emotions, and that we can use anger to unmix those emotions, has been like kind of proven itself in my life, that even when I get mild forms of depression, and I used to get like debilitating depression, but even now when I get into that kind of lull, kind of starting to go down in my energy, that using conscious anger and sometimes I have to, like, to do it from the state of depression takes something. It takes often a space holder who's willing to like cheer me on while I do it and kind of walk me through it, or else it sometimes takes like breaking down into sadness about being depressed again. So I find that other feelings can also be gateways to breaking depression, not only the unmixing using conscious anger.
I came back because I want to add something that just came to me, the role of eating in grieving. Because I was leaving you all with this celebrational thing in me, celebrating grieving, and here came in this important thing of having if you're grieving together of eating, and this not being it part of the ritual, a part of the process, a part of this. I am putting this into my body in a certain way, and it is with sadness and connection, and with all and also with joy, and they're not mixed necessarily, but it just this eating thing came, like the artistic part came to you, Val. And I just wanted to share this, that this is why I came back, even if it sounds a little crazy, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think it's crazy because because this is a part of very old and very lived traditions in many cultures, that grieving means eating together too.
Yeah, thank you.
So, side aspect. Yeah.
Thank you.
Goodbye again. Thank you.
It's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. It makes me think of feasting in other cultures. Yeah, feasting.
It's not eating, yeah, it's feasting. That's the word. Yeah, thank you.
It is. It is a very old old human tradition. Yes.
Yeah, and there is something sacred in it.
Yeah.
And respectful. It's not just pigging out because we are together. You can have a feast where you just go all jolly and everything, but feasting in grieving, and I don't necessarily mean for somebody who's dead, but also everything where you are in transition, and where you are grieving for something that's changing. There it is a sacred thing to feast. Yeah.
I think there might be a clue in that too, to what Joanne was talking about bringing aliveness, that when, in a way, I hear, let's not forget our physical bodies and nurturing them, and with artistic expression too, this way of bringing our physical bodies and the creative process back into kind of to complete the loop of like going down into the death process and up into the life coming up and out and creation happening, because grief is so often associated with a death of some kind or damage or loss of some kind, and that we have other bodies too to take care of, our physical body, to forget about our physical body because we're grieving or because there's been a loss, is only going to work so long. So yeah, feasting and creating, and even things like singing and growing a garden, these are often associated with what humans have done from beyond maybe memory to mark passages, rites of passage.
I'm feeling really, really touched right now by like this part of what we're talking about, because for me, grief or like sadness is really connected to beauty, and beauty is really connected to sadness for me. There's also beauty that makes me joyful, but I associate joy as well more with fun. I don't know, I would have to explore that more, but I experience a lot of meaning that things are allowed to be beautiful, and that we come together in a beautiful way, and we recognize that we want to be together. That's already so beautiful, and it's sacred. And then just to have our emotions move through us, and to honor this and to be, and then yeah, singing and feasting and all these are like vehicles through which we manifest that we feel, and it's such a beautiful tribute. And I actually feel really sad about all the moments of quick eating, and even though somehow I also like the ease of it, but when there's not a recognition that this sacredness and this sacredness is possible of designing a moment together and being there. And yeah, so somehow being with and being and beauty, ever since I was little, I somehow associated to a bit of sadness. I also always loved sad music somehow because I experienced so much meaning and beauty in it. Yeah.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you for bringing tears into this space.
And with these tears, I will leave you now. I have a next commitment, and I would love to stay here more because I'm enjoying the space with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
And I'm going to bid everyone goodbye as well. And thanks for an incredible experience. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Philip. Goodbye
Bye-bye.
for now.
Goodbye. I'm leaving again.
Thank you, everybody, for this beautiful experience. And I'm also going to go and do some conscious feasting right now and have lunch.
Perfect.
Bye.
Goodbye.
One thing I would like to add to what I've already said is I really appreciated, I'm not sure who said it, but finding the gold in the grief process. And that really adds another total different feeling really on the whole thing is that there is gold in pretty much everything. And so it's nice to find it. And I also like the layers that someone brought out is, having some visible feelings and emotions going on, but then what is it being built on? Where does it actually come from, originate from? And what are we grieving mostly? Like what is it, the loss of this person or this opportunity, or because now our worlds are different than they were when we woke up in the morning, or what is it actually that we're doing? So, but I really appreciate this session. Thank you so much, Nicole, for putting it together.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to leave now too.
Thank you, Kurt.
And I'll be leaving as well. So thank you again ever so much. And it's nice to see some familiar faces that I hadn't seen in a while. So that was great. Thank you.
Bye, Joanne.
Thank you. Bye, Joanne, and goodbye, Joanne. Thank you for being here.
Oh, and then there were two.